Hello, my name is Leire Carbonell, and I'm a professor of interpretation, English into Spanish, at the Middlebury Institute of International Studies at Monterey, commonly known as MIIS.
And my name is Lauren Hammer-Aguilera, and I recently graduated from MIIS with a master's in translation and interpretation, and my working languages are Spanish and English.
We are here today to explain how we use the iPad and the Apple Pencil in our interpretation classes. In my consecutive classes, whether in person or online, I use my iPad, here you have it, and the Apple Pencil. The application that I use to take notes is Notability. Notability was the third-party application that I chose years ago to take notes. It is very intuitive in my experience. Of course, you can choose Notes or any other application of your preference. Let's do a demo. Here, there is a speech that we worked with this past year. I will play it for everybody, and then Lauren will take notes on the iPad, and then she will interpret from them. So let's go ahead and let's work with the speech. It's a speech that Secretary of State John Kerry gave back in 2016. He was holding a joint press conference with the Colombian president at that time, Juan Manuel Santos. Let's go ahead.
Today, our delegations discussed the tough issues that still remain to be resolved, including plans for disarming and demobilizing the FARC and measures to assure accountability for wartime atrocities. The outlook is promising, but the stakes are much too high to take anything for granted, and we don't. No one is in a celebratory status. There's work to be done. We're here to renew the commitment for these months in order to complete the task. Having gone to war myself, I can tell you I know what it means that in peacetime, children are supposed to bury their parents, but in wartime, obviously, parents bury their children.
El día de hoy nuestras delegaciones abordaron unos asuntos difíciles que están por resolverse todavía, entre ellos los planes para desarmar y desmovilizar las FARC y unas medidas para asegurar una rendición de cuentas por las atrocidades cometidas en tiempos de guerra. El panorama es alentador, sin embargo, los riesgos siguen siendo muchos para dar cualquier cosa por sentada. Tampoco lo estamos haciendo. Nadie está celebrando, hay trabajo por hacer. Estamos aquí para renovar nuestro compromiso para los meses venideros hasta lograr el objetivo. Habiendo ido a la guerra, yo sé que, les puedo decir que en tiempos de paz son los hijos quienes entierran a sus padres, sin embargo, que obviamente en tiempos de guerra son los padres quienes entierran a sus hijos.
Thank you, Lauren. Lauren interpreted using her iPad and the notes that she took with her Apple Pencil. And this is how we do it in the class. In the classroom, after students interpret, I then go over their interpretation using my own notes, the notes that I took with my iPad and my Apple Pencil. I share the screen with the class so all students can see my notes, and then I give my feedback. This way, students can always see the notes taken by their professor. Let's go ahead and let me share my own notes with you. Here you can see the notes that I took in black, and then here you see Lauren's name in blue. And this is exactly what happens in class. I share my notes, all students can see my notes in black, and then we can see the feedback that I have for Lauren. Lauren did a wonderful job interpreting, so there is not much feedback. You can see here great solutions, and I mark those with like a happy face, and then we will talk about them in the class. So then you can see here my notes, and then again another happy face. And right at the end, you can see here we've finished, and I highlighted this part in yellow because it's an important part for technique. There was a comparison right at the end, and then I always talk about technique to students. So I think you can get the idea of what happens in the class. As you can see, for each speech with which we work in the class, students have a clear benchmark and can compare their notes to their professor's notes. Not only that, since I have more than one student in my classes, I color code my feedback using a different color per student. Let's go ahead and see an example of a speech of one of my classes a few weeks ago. Here you have the speech. We can see that I heard the interpretation of two students, Alicia. I gave her the color blue, and Eduardo. I gave him the color purple. Then you can see happy faces, good solutions. Here you have a comment that I have about grammar in Spanish. So everything that you see marked as SPA means that is a grammar mistake in Spanish. Here we can see again some technique. It is highlighted in yellow. As I told you, T is for technique. And here we can see a meaning error. It's in blue, so we know it was Alicia's. And then we will talk about it in the class. Again, we see grammar mistakes. We see some omissions here. And then here we can see a passive form. That's why I highlighted it in yellow, because it's very important to know the technique in note-taking for passive forms in English. And like this, we just get to the end. But this is exactly what will happen in the class. I will just go ahead and go over my own notes and then go over the students' feedback and color code it. So at all times, we know who said what. When the class is over, I email my notes to the whole class. Right after my class, students have, for their reference, all my notes and color-coded feedback. As a professor, I end up with a repository of the students' performance based on my notes. What is wonderful is that in Notability, you can create subjects and dividers and move each file to its corresponding class. You can also change the title of the notes and store all notes by week and date. Let me show it to you. Here you have it. Right here, you can see the spring semester at MIIS, my spring semester, with all the classes that I taught. And then you can see all the speeches that we worked with and the materials that we worked with. For example, if I were to select consecutive second year, here you can see that I have a repository of all the speeches and material that we worked with in my class. And then, as I said, you can classify it by name, modify date, created date, and you can change the title, the subject, so you can categorize the material based on your own preferences. Lauren, as a student, how has the experience been for you in your consecutive classes?
Well, the iPad really revolutionized my experience in my consecutive courses more than it did in any other course, to be honest. Not only do I take my consecutive notes directly on my iPad like you just saw in the demonstration, I also have a much more intuitive and immediate experience with the feedback that I received from you during our classes and from my classmates. I purchased this iPad Pro between my first and second years at MIIS. I'd really wanted to go paperless for a long time. And after seeing you and your experience with the iPad in class firsthand, I decided to take the leap. And I did so specifically at that moment because I wanted to incorporate the new technology into my second year so that hopefully by the time I would graduate, I would have overcome the learning curve that I expected the iPad would present in my consecutive note-taking learning experience. But much to my surprise, within a matter of days of purchasing the iPad Pro, I was already taking notes just as well as, if not better than I had been on a traditional StenoPad, which is what I had been using. I believe that the reason for this is because the iPad has such a natural writing experience. You can write on it just like you would on any other surface using any other writing instrument. Personally, I'm left-handed, and I drag my hand behind me when I write. So I'm pretty much used to living with a big ink stain on this part of my left hand. I was initially pretty concerned when I was about to make the purchase of the iPad Pro. I thought, is this device going to be able to pick up the movements that I make with the Apple Pencil if I'm resting my hand on the device at the same time? I thought I might have to change the way I write to be able to use this device in class. I was quickly proven wrong about all of that, however, because the pencil handles just like a normal pen, only in my case without the mess. And it features a writing response time that's immediate, as if you were using a pen on a normal piece of paper. And this is essential when you're taking consecutive notes. You're writing as quickly as you can, making precise little symbols and notes to keep up with a fast speaker and not lose any content. I also use Notability, and I created this StenoPad template, which you saw during the demonstration. So I take notes on a 2-column lined virtual kind of paper that mimics the paper that would come in a traditional StenoPad, which I was using before transitioning to the iPad. And I take my notes in one color, and then I take my feedback down in another color. I'm going to show you what that looks like quickly. I'm a really visual learner, so it's helpful for me to be able to see where there's room for improvement, not just hear it. So for example, one of the challenges that I really faced when I was starting to take consecutive notes was leaving words without their endings, taking down a note and only writing down the first part of the word. And here I purposely did that in one of these examples so that I could show you how I would take down the feedback. So now I know that if I want to write down the word promising, I need to finish the word so that I'll be able to remember with the visual cue what the word was. Here I've written kind of the first half of the word down, so that would be an incomplete or incorrect note. So some of the feedback that I received from professors and from classmates has more to do with what actually came out of my mouth. The rendering itself, I used an incorrect vocabulary word, and I could take that down too if I had rendered demobilize wrong, and then I need to learn it's actually desmovilizar, and I had pronounced it incorrectly, for example. I could write that down so that I can reinforce the vocabulary. But if I had taken down a note improperly, I can also come back, even if in a different color, for example, or bring in the highlighter and say, no, this is not how I want to write down this note. I want to write it down, cut out all of the vowels, preserve the consonants, and have a more incomplete note that in a longer speech, for example, a longer segment of a speech, I would have a hard time remembering what this little half note of mine is really getting at. So I can come back in and correct and refine my note taking so that I can continue to take better and better consecutive notes. And finally, I just love being able to review my interpretations after class using the feedback that you email to us. When you're learning a skill that's as difficult and detail-oriented as note-taking for consecutive interpretation, it's so helpful to have a professional interpreter's notes for reference. Everybody takes notes differently, but there's always room for improvement, and being able to compare is essential. If you, professor, had wanted to take notes on a traditional StenoPad and share them with us, you would need to somehow take a photo of every page or scan your notes, and that's just unrealistic because it would be unwieldy and would take a long time to do that. But with the iPad, you can press a few buttons and one compact downloadable file is waiting for me in my inbox so that I can look at it at my convenience. And I find that to be streamlined for you, streamlined for me, and really, really helpful when you're learning a new skill like this.
Thank you, Lauren. We will leave it here for consecutive. We hope you liked it. If you do have any questions, please let us know. Stay tuned for a second video demoing how we use the iPad and the Apple Pencil in simultaneous.